Hello, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This week I am talking to James Conor Patterson. James is a poet from Newry, where I grew up, and I've talked about him on the podcast before because he allowed us very kindly to put one of his poems into the Radio 4 documentary that Divil's own. James had written a poem about that in his book, Bandit Country, which is great and well worth a read. We talk about it obviously in the thing. It was nominated for the T.S. Eliot Award. So he's a very clever man. And it was great. It was so much fun talking to him about like what it is to write poetry, and the similarities between that and comedy were amazing. Anyway, I talk very little in this one. I just sort of allow him to talk because he's smarter than me. and that's the way it should be done. But of course, because it's me, the fucking camera, I don't know what is wrong. It fucking overheated and it stops working at some point during this. So if you're watching along, then apologies whenever it turns into just a screenshot. But I mean, I don't know what I can do. I followed every guide and oh my, it's so frustrating. Anyway, what's new? Something went wrong in the podcast. What is new? What a shock. Christ. I mean, I don't know what the fuck to do about that. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'll talk to Vittorio's producer, I reckon. Comlung, as he's known. Outside of that, interesting week gigging. I will put an episode on the Patreon, a little audio episode, because something happened at a gig on Friday night. And I very nearly I very nearly ruined my career. I was saved from ruining my own career. But I'll talk about that on the Patreon podcast. So sign up to that if you haven't already. I think it's like a $5 a month or something, and you get access to all extra stuff. Anyway, okay, without further ado, here is my chat with James Conor Patterson by his book, by Bandit Country. It's so good. All right, catch us next week. Bye. No, I don't know how I missed it, but I hadn't seen that New Frontier that you had done. So I ordered it this morning. Before
it's good fun to do. I don't know if I would rush back to do editing again, because that felt like a very sort of different skill. Nearly.
So that was a collection of writers from the border, or on a border or whatever.
Yeah, and just kind of the way it fell. I suppose the vast majority of the people that I could writers that I could think of who were based in the border area or who had grown up there, were kind of Derry, Donegal, but you know, there were a surprising good amount of people sort of down our direction as well, you know. A lot of writers from Dundalk and places like that.
How do you find them in that? Or like, is that a silly question? You're just reading stuff all the time?
Literally just kind of instinct, really, you know. I suppose probably similar in comedy, in the sense that, like, just from years of doing festivals and book launches and different things like that, the Irish kind of writing scene is very small, so everyone kind of knows everyone else, which is lovely in a lot of ways. Very different over here, where it's kind of a bit more closed off, but at home everyone kind of knows everyone else, and you kind of get to know certain things about people. You get to know their books and other things, and you just kind of carry this roster really of writers around in your head. So when I came up with the idea, it was like a post-Brexit sort of thing. Wanted to shine a light really on all the good things that were happening kind of around the border, and sort of make that part of the conversation. And yeah, just all these kind of writers who I would have known previously and sort of respected, I kind of reached out to them and asked them if they would be interested in doing it.
Is there then any awkward conversations, because presumably if you don't like the piece, right, and then you do you have to take it? How does that work? Do you solicit work and then you're like, you have to put it in now, right? Okay.
I mean, pretty much the way I did it was reached out to those 27 writers involved. I wanted to get 32 as kind of a little sly sort of thing, but I couldn't make up the numbers. Close enough. But I would sort of reach out to each of the writers and be like, listen, I'm doing this anthology which is themed around the idea of borders, the Irish border, however you want to kind of interpret the brief, whether it be poetry or fiction or maybe an essay, like a kind of memoir kind of thing that you want to send across. I'm happy to take a look at it. But yeah, there were kind of difficulties, I suppose, in the editing process. Everyone has their own particularities about how they like their writing to be presented. And when you're dealing with kind of 27 competing ideas about what their writing should be, and being respectful of their wishes, but also kind of making a consistency which runs throughout the book, that balancing act was very difficult at times, you know.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Especially because I imagine there's times when you're like, if I just write this little bit, this will fit in this section the best.
If I connect this here, I could probably make a novel out of this or whatever, you know. No, for the most part, do you know what it was? Like what surprised me was the most experienced writers who were involved in the collection, like Patrick McCabe, who wrote The Butcher Boy, as an example. They were the least precious about their writing. Patrick McCabe just kind of sent this brilliant piece across, and he was like, just do what you think is right for the collection. You know, he was kind of very unpretentious and unguarded about how he wanted the piece to come across. So that was a nice surprise. I kind of expected that the bigger writers would come attached with an ego, and it was almost the complete opposite of that, you know.
I suppose they've had enough success to not care about that.
Like that dude's was he nominated for the Booker, I think, for The Butcher Boy, but you know, there's movies and all the rest of it made out of his book. So and he's probably at an age now where he's just like permanently kind of zen, you know. He's done his legacy. That's
very interesting. And then obviously, so it's so different from your writing itself. And I find you a fascinating character because I think, like, Newry, especially, I suppose any town that you leave, you're sort of always kind of, you know, fascinated by. But Newry in particular, I think, is an interesting place because lots of people, for whatever reason, come from there and do crazy stuff. You know, even a couple of weeks ago, you seen that sports business that was sold for like $200 million.
Oh, Statsport.
That was as like every Premier League footballer's been tracked from Newry. For years. You know, it's like that makes sort of total sense.
The seat of power.
Yeah, this is it. Like, well,
Drumlane Mill, the seat of power. Like, you know,
Philly Byrne, the guy from Gamma Bomb. There's a Gamma Bomb documentary, and it's so funny. He describes Newry as a place where you can go into a bar and there'll be an old guy sitting at the end of the bar talking about an app he's designed, but he has done it, whereas everyone else, any other town, they've not. This guy will have developed an app. But what I'm getting at is, what I've not seen is lots of poets. And especially, I know I think I'm a couple of years older than you, but to say to yourself, I'm going to be a poet, the balls, I think that must have taken like a fairly tough town where anything kind of remotely sort of above its station, is that, or, you know,
I know what you mean,
like outrageous almost.
I mean, my kind of experience of coming to poetry really was, it was through school. And I know that sounds really fucking boring, but you know, I tended to get in trouble quite a lot in school, on the one hand, and then whenever exams came along, I did really well. So I was just permanently kind of frustrating my teachers. The one class really where I didn't really get in trouble a lot, or two, it was either English or history, because those were the sort of things that held my interest and things that I gravitated towards. And luckily, from about GCSE through A level, I had a really brilliant teacher, Mr. McMahon, who kind of incubated this interest in writing from a very early age, and it was reading Heaney for the first time, and that sounds like such a cliche when it comes to Irish poetry, but it really is true.
Yeah.
That when kind of Shakespeare and all of this old highfalutin stuff is being shoveled at you, and suddenly here's somebody who speaks English, somebody who speaks properly, and speaks like I do, it felt really refreshing. I was like, oh well, that's what poetry can be. And there's actually a line from Heaney, I think in a poem of his called The Ministry of Fear, where he talks about his experience of getting into poetry as, a young farmer lad from South Derry. He says, I was dabbling in verses until it became a life, and it was sort of the same for me. It wasn't like a decision one day where I decided, oh, I really want to be a poet or I really want to be a writer. It was something that I kind of did in secret for a lot of years, and then you eventually get the confidence after doing it for a period of time to go, oh, well, I'm interested in bringing this to like a creative writing workshop where we can kind of exchange ideas and I can read this aloud for the first time and share it with people. And it's that buzz of, like other people responding back to your work in a positive way. You go, this isn't shit, like,
yeah.
Maybe there's something in this, and that gives you the encouragement to kind of keep going. And actually on the Newry thing as well, of like Newry being like a fairly tough working class sort of town, my experience of people's response to it was almost the opposite of what you would expect. It was very protective almost, like when I launched Bandit Country in Newry, I actually did it in the town hall, which was a weird experience. And like all of these, members of my extended family, very kind of tough living people turned out, and, they wanted their picture taken with me for the paper and all the rest of it. It was really supportive. And then afterwards we all decamped to the Catholic Working Men's Club for a drink, so it was lovely. People were really supportive. That there was almost like a pride in the idea that Newry could punch above its weight and could be literary, and it was the old Joycean thing about sort of Dublin, where Joyce wanted to paint a picture of Dublin that would sort of last through the ages, and Ulysses, Dubliners, and all the rest of it. In some small way, I wanted to kind of do that for Newry. I was like, I want to map this as literary territory.
Yeah.
Because it is as literary and as rich in life as anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, it also helps that Bandit Country was great.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was so good, man.
Oh, thank you.
And it's funny, I would think of like you're talking about, like, teachers have such an impact. Obviously, I remember we had a teacher, Sean Hollywood, who was like a kind of a famous character.
Oh yeah.
He was our English teacher, and I remember him saying
he was an artist, wasn't he? I think.
Yeah, well, he was an actor. And he was a big actor and politician. He stood against Rivers of Blood. That guy.
Oh, Enoch Powell.
When Enoch Powell stood for election at home, Sean Hollywood stood against him. Anyway, but I remember him saying, the thing about poetry is that it has to be read aloud.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, it is true. Obviously, you understand the drama of it when you read, but with yours especially, because I don't know what the correct terminology is, but you write in like an accent. You write in a Newry accent.
Yeah.
and it really only does make sense properly whenever I'm sounding it out in my head.
Yeah,
it's class.
It was important for me to do that because Bandit Country sort of came about, and it was again, you know, the post-Brexit thing of, in again, like as small a way as possible, trying to correct some of the narrative around the border region and what I knew to be true versus what was being kind of said in the news and so on. Like, it's almost easy to forget now because, you know, Brexit's nearly a decade ago.
I know.
But like a lot of the conversation was, you know, if this happens, civil war's going to break out again, and you know the border region in particular is like a flashpoint for a lot of the kind of violence that happened during the Troubles. Hence the title, you know, Bandit Country. That was a name that was foisted upon us by the British state. So there was a very kind of like a deep sense of mission almost to kind of help correct some of that narrative by calling it Bandit Country and then just deliver a book of sort of funny stories and in jokes and, you know, urban legends and stuff, rather than the traditional narrative about Newry and South Armagh, which would have been that it was this, you know, lawless bandit
Cowboys
country.
And Indians, yeah.
You know, so the decision then to write in vernacular was, it sort of came from years of reading. There's a great tradition of it in Scottish literature. So if you read Trainspotting, the whole book is written in like Edinburgh and sort of some Glaswegian dialect. But there are poets in Scottish literature like Tom Leonard and Hugh MacDiarmid who would have done the same. There's not really that tradition in Irish poetry so much. It would either be, you know, the decision is you either write in English or you write in Irish, which is a lovely option to have, but it didn't, neither of those two things felt quite true to what I was trying to do. And I was like, you know, if I'm writing a book that wants to represent a people, it should talk the way that the people there talk, you know, full of punctuating every sentence with a swear word, or, you know, dropping the G off the end of a word, like instead of fucking, it's fucking, you know? Just little things like that, little cues that hopefully people from back home would recognize as true to how they actually spoke.
Yeah, and it's funny, it's the book, I think I said this to you, but like whenever it came out, I must have bought 10 copies of it for Christmas presents. Yeah. It was like anyone that I knew from around home, I was like, this is so good.
Yeah,
it's a great it is a great representation of us, I think.
Oh, thank you.
And then I read the review in the fucking Guardian or something, and the guy, I don't want to bring up it's so frustrating because I don't read, but it was a particular point where this guy missed the whole thing of it so much that it actually became, I was like, yeah, like this is, like it is outsider art to these people.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
He couldn't get his head around.
Well, that was, you know, when that, I think that piece was like it was like a roundup of all of the poets who had been nominated that year for the T.S. Eliot Prize.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was.
So there was like a sentence each on like each of the books. And so when I read it, you know, to see it kind of reduced down to that, I was just like, you know, my reaction then and my reaction now is just like, it's not for you. You know? So I was almost like delighted that it had kind of rankled in the right way with the right people, you know. But the people who met it on its own terms and kind of got what I was trying to do, you know, it did get there were a couple of like good reviews and stuff, which I was really happy with, you know. Yeah. But but that one was funny.
Well, it was just like, it's such I hate comedy critics as well.
Yeah.
Not all of them. There's two of them that I really do like. There's a woman called Rachel Healy, and there's a guy called Nuruddin who writes in Rolling Stone. And I like them because their sensibilities are really matched to mine.
Yeah.
So if they say they like something, chances are I'll like it, and if they say
you'll check it out, sort of thing.
Yeah. And the opposite.
Yeah.
And also it means that whenever they write about me, they're the only people that I actually would look at.
Yeah.
Because if I've missed the mark on something, I have to be like,
Yeah.
it's so line. And then you see other people, and you're like, you have no business reviewing or critiquing stand-up comedy because you don't have a sense of humor, or like, you know, you've just such a different idea that it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter at all what you think. And I thought that, I suppose that's what I thought about that, was like,
it's
this
funny.
is the guy who, and he can miss this, like, which is the thing that I was like, that is the most grounding part of the whole collection, is that, like, that is why I'm like, oh my god, this is me, this is my friend, it couldn't be any more in the nose. And that guy missed. I was like, this fucking idiot, man.
It's funny, like, you know, in terms of criticism, it's like, you know, some people kind of wield it as like a weapon to, I don't know, get their own poisonous sort of worldview across, rather than actually meeting a work of art, be it a comedy gig, be it a book, be it, you know, as an art critic, if you go to a gallery and there's a new exhibition on, be it any of those things, like, you want to kind of meet those things on its own terms as a starting point. And then, you know, good criticism should be, okay, well, you know, understand what the artist was trying to do. Did they succeed in what they themselves were trying to do? And that, you know, if they succeeded or failed in that, then, you know, you can give a kind of good or bad review based on those terms. You know, I think that's good criticism. Like, there actually was a review of Bandit Country in, I think it was Poetry Ireland, and it was long. It was about, you know, 600 or 700 words, and it really went into kind of detail, and not everything in it was positive, you know, but the points that the reviewer was kind of making about things that didn't work or whatever were things that I myself was like, you know, after the book was published, I was like, oh, I wish I'd done that.
Which is,
you know, and I was like, oh, that person has actually seen what I was trying to do. So it didn't feel like an attack.
Yes.
For its own sake, it felt like real deep engagement with the work, you know.
Yeah, I suppose that's with like how many poems are in Bandit Country, do you think?
I
have it here. Why am I even asking you? Because that is like, it's not like
probably
one
about
story.
45
so,
maybe.
Yeah, to give that oh no, more than that, mate. You're on 69. I've got here, or whatever. But whatever it is, anyway, they to give a collection of that when you're like, they're not. It's not like the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
You know, it's not one story that you're following through. I suppose it does require that kind of like 700, like an actual almost like a dissertation on it to take that apart.
And it's probably why poetry is the least engaged with form of literature, really, is because it requires that constant sort of deep attention, you know, in order to fully understand what it's trying to do. You know, it's not like a beach read or a novel where you can kind of, you know, pick something up and leave it aside for a couple of days and go back, and, you know, you're straight back into the thread of the narrative. You know, poetry is very much like a line by line, you know, syllables by syllable sort of high wire act, and like when people sit down and read it, because of that, it's invariably a very slow thing. But what's rewarding about it is that because you tend to, or I you know, at least my experience of reading poetry is, because I spend so much time with a book that's quite thin, you know, on the surface, it you know, you end up feeling like a deeply sort of personal connection. If a book of poetry is good, and if it connects with the reader in the right way, you know, the best books of poetry I've carried with me, you know, more than probably anything else because of that, you know.
Yeah, I do. But then every now and again, and like, I don't read poetry widely, but when you find a every now and again you will find a poem that connects or like hits you in with such strong effect that you feel like it was written just for you. You know, you talk about Seamus Heaney. I remember when I was digging that, like, that to me is like, that's like a That's perfect. Like,
Yeah.
that's a perfect piece of art. I love it. I love everything about it. You know.
And it's full of, you know, what we were talking about in terms of, you know, growing up in Newry and, you know, coming from a kind of tough background where there are certain expectations about how to be a man, how to carry yourself in the world, and digging is full of that sort of conflict, you know, between, you know, the earthiness of what he knew and, you know, picking up a pen and you know, using that as his digging tool and, you know, tilling the earth with it. It's lovely. It really is.
But when you're to talk about your writing, how this is from my missus, so Jenna, who studied poetry. Was like,
lovely.
Ask him these questions. She was like, ask him these questions. There was one actually which I was going to ask before. Was I've seen you say that you started poetry almost as an exercise in music, but you didn't have musical ability.
Yeah.
So what in your head was different about the idea of writing a poem to writing song lyrics, or is there a difference?
There probably is very little difference in reality. You know, the only kind of difference between lyric writing and poetry that I can kind of see is that lyric writing emphasizes, you know, there are refrains and choruses which are repeated throughout. You know, it's almost like a center point that the singer keeps coming back to in order to drive home the central point of the song, right? You know, I'm thinking of, as an example, like a really lyrical, visual sort of song, like, been listening a lot recently to Bruce Springsteen, Atlantic City.
Okay.
Which is this really sort of vivid picture of a guy who's sort of down on his luck, in Atlantic City in sort of 1970s, 1980s Reagan America. You know, and it feels in parts like a poem. It feels like, you know, you are sort of listening to a poem being spoken aloud. The only kind of difference that I can see in that is that sort of that drive towards repetition. Whereas poetry is kind of structured more like a story, really. You know, it's like, you know, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, even if it's just a short thing, you know, which is encapsulated in a couple of lines, it's just kind of like a short story. Whereas a song sort of emphasizes that repetition a lot more. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I do wish like I had the ability to set it to music, but you know, it's kind of if you don't have that kind of innate you know, musical ability, it is difficult. It
doesn't always work when other people do it too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened to Michael D. Higgins' latest album.
Oh no. but God bless him.
Yeah, but the the music is really odd.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever about that. But the another thing, and this is like every writer's like a question for every writer. Same for comedians. But like, how do you recognize fairly quickly if you've written something good, or how long does that take? Or
it depends. Sometimes you can crack something out first draft, and it looks like how you imagined it was going to be in your head. You know, and you go, oh, that's right. That feels right. You know. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, you know, where there are certain pieces where you kind of struggle with them for, you know, that doesn't feel quite right, or that line or that word feels a little bit out of place. And that's where reading it aloud comes into play, because if you are just kind of reading it off a blank page over and over again, you can't really spot the kinks in it. Whereas if you read it aloud, invariably that's where you find yourself maybe tripping over a word or something like that, and you go, I wonder why it's always at that point that keeps happening. And until you kind of massage that into something which fits more nicely with the overall narrative of the thing, it will keep, you know, you will keep finding yourself almost like a tick falling over that point in the poem. But yeah, that's where the kind of speaking it out loud becomes like really important.
That's really interesting. That I just was speaking to an actor recently.
Yeah.
And because I'm fascinated by actors, and I've talked around here of the ability for like a good actor to say somebody else's words and make it sound like their own. And I was asking them about like, how do you know and where do you like trip up? And they were like, well, it's bad if it's bad writing. Yeah, it's the same as it's like it's only if it's bad it doesn't sound right. Yeah. Usually the writing will be the problem. Yeah, obviously if you're starting at base of being fairly good at acting, that is like
it's a thing that you kind of learn over a long period of time. You know, I suppose when you're starting out writing, your way into it is through imitation. So you try and imitate sort of the things that you've read and the things that you see. In the kind of early sort of days of writing, your only real points of reference were either lyricists that you would listen to, or kind of stuff that you came across in school. So you would have this weird mash of like, you know, Joe Strummer from The Clash and fucking Shakespeare, you know. It would come out terribly. Over time, you sort of learn that how unnatural that is. You start to develop your own voice, and you sort of become a bit more confident in yourself to go, well, why am I putting it like that when that's not how I think or feel or talk, you know? Yeah. It really is just a confidence thing, you know?
That's amazing. That's like literally exactly the same as comedy. But how long do you reckon it took you to get to where you were like, oh, this is me now?
Years and years, you know, like really. I probably started writing when I was about 15, and anytime I go home, my dad would always joke about the fact that from about 15 until I left home at 18, I had this shoebox under my bed which was just filled with, you know, lever arch A4 file pages, you know, with just dross, but it was stuff that I had to kind of get out, and that was an important part of developing. The next sort of phase of development was when I was at university, starting to go to open mic nights, open mic poetry nights, and kind of literally like there used to be a bookshop up near Queens called Bookfinders. It's closed now, sadly, but they used to do a night called Poetry and Pints, and the whole thing was, you know, you brought your own booze, sort of sat in, and you listened to people read their poetry. And, you know, a big part of my development was getting the confidence to go up and read stuff, whether good or bad, to a room full of people, and sort of gauge from their reaction what was working, what wasn't. And, you know, that thing again of speaking it out loud and hearing for yourself where the kinks are and where things kind of feel unnatural. And then, you know, I was lucky enough as well at Queen's to sort of fall under the mentorship of a poet called Ciaran Carson. Oh, yeah. Who would have written Belfast in the same way that I was trying to write about Newry. You know, sort of given that earthy, realistic sense of the actuality of the place, away from, you know, the headlines and the stereotypes and so on. You know, he was really important for.
Yeah, so that's funny. Yeah, you can see that. I read one. Does he have a? Is where my memory's going to go. Does he have a poem called Confetti something?
Belfast Confetti.
Yeah. And that's so good, that because you are. Yeah, you read it and you are there. Yeah, you know, you might as well. You could be reading a paragraph someone's just written about. Yeah, like, but it's perfect little encapsulation.
It's a brilliant image as well. You know, the Belfast Confetti in that poem is, you know, are like, you know, bottles and petrol bombs and stuff raining down during a riot, which I always loved as an image. You know, but you know, having that kind of confidence to write with immediacy about your own experience was a kind of really important thing that came from, you know, being under Ciaran's wing, really. Yeah. For so many years. And, you know, I think without his intervention, you know, my development as a writer probably would have stalled, and it would have taken me a lot longer to get to where I am now.
And what, like, How did his mentorship? What did it look like? What did that?
He was one of the things that was great about him was he grew up in a bilingual household. So he grew up in the Falls in the 40s and 50s, before the Westlink came through. So it was like old West Belfast, and a big part of what he writes about are all of these streets that he would have played on as a child, which were just demolished, and then became the Westlink. And they only kind of exist now in photographs and on old maps and kind of in his memory. That was a really kind of rich vein that he plugged throughout his writing. But because he was bilingual as well, and he grew up speaking Irish as well as English in his house, he had this almost obsession with the etymology of words. So if you brought a poem into one of his workshops, for example, and you used a word which was kind of just fill in space, which, in the early days of any sort of writer is, something that everyone's guilty of, he would zero in on it immediately, and he'd be like, what do you mean by that? Like, why have you chosen that word? And if you couldn't justify it, he would sort of suggest that you reconsider it or put something else in its place. He was all about exactitude, not in any kind of slavish way, but there had to be a kind of etymological, linguistic justification for why you would use a particular term.
Yeah.
And I think that came from existing in that space between two languages where you almost have to choose which way you're going to go. If I speak in Irish, this is how I would put it. If I speak in English, this is how I would put it.
Yeah.
Maybe that instilled in him this instinctive obsession with always kind of thinking inside language.
That's a great lesson to learn too, isn't
Yeah,
it, for
yeah,
any
yeah.
writer? It is easy to just throw anything on there, like, I'll figure that out later.
I think probably because poetry is all about exactitude as well, and because you have really just such a limited space to say what you want to say, compared with fiction where you can sort of fill things in the narrative, and it flows because it's sort of swept up in the story. Poetry, you don't really have that luxury because people do zero in on every word and kind of every line, and if something feels baggy, it will stand out.
That probably is a good time to ask about are you thinking of the structure of a poem before you write it? Like, will you know how long this is going to be, or does that sort of reveal itself in the?
It sort of it depends. It took me a long time to figure it out, and I suppose I still am in a lot of ways. It's half of it is guesswork. Usually a good subject thought about with clarity will find its form. You know what I mean? So the way I tend to begin things is, if I want to write a poem about a particular subject, the first thing that I try and imagine is the environment. So what does that place look like? And then I'll make notes. Okay, like, what can I see? What can I smell? What can I hear? What can I sense? What's the sensory experience of it? As a beginning point. Then who's speaking this? Where's this poem coming from? And who is it addressed to? You put those elements in, and this is all just still note taking. And then I suppose the final part of it is, okay, we've got the environment, we've got the speaker, we need a narrative. What's the story here? What are they doing in this environment? And then once you have the narrative, generally a form will kind of announce itself and start to will make sense for the story that you're trying to tell. Does this poem rhyme? Well, it might rhyme if that feels true to how the speaker of the story talks and feels and behaves. You know, but there are sometimes where a poem just sort of doesn't have a form and it becomes a sort of short prose poem almost, you know.
Yeah.
It's strange, you know. It's almost like, you know, not to be too airy fairy about it, but
let's get airy fairy. This is the spot to be airy fairy.
You know, people like Yeats used to kind of believe that they were channeling something from somewhere else, that, you know, the process of writing poetry in particular wasn't an entirely self-generated act.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to read some of Yeats's critical work about what poetry is, you know, he almost talks about it in the same terms that like a psychic would talk about mediumship, you know, that you're channeling something from somewhere else and that something is speaking through you. I don't know if I would go that far, but there is a point in the writing where you have all of the self-generated stuff down on paper, but in order to turn that into a poem, there is a leap that's made somewhere, and that's kind of hard to set down exactly what that leap is or what it looks like. Maybe it's instinct, or, you know, but sometimes it does feel as though something else is coming through you, you know.
Yeah, I do. It's funny because I do a lot of my writing on stage for a comedy.
Yeah.
And I'll have like a general sort of an idea of like, all right, I want to sort of have an idea. I want to speak about this, and I'll have like maybe 3 or 4 lines where I'm like, that'll be funny. Like, I know I'll be able to, and then the rest of it'll be like, okay, now let's figure this out. And it feels like the pressure of the crowd, the moment on stage, and then the history that you have of creating as well, and all, is those lines do come.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, it's a incredibly stressful place to put yourself at times where you're like, you know, because sometimes they don't come and you're just talking nonsense and ruining someone's day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that feeling of when a line just pops out and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know where that was, but
yeah. That's tasty. Where did that come from? You know, it's the same thing with, I remember Paul McCartney talking about the famous story about how he wrote Yesterday, you know, the Beatles song, was apparently he woke up one morning after dreaming, you know, with the tune for Yesterday in his head. It was just ready made. It was there. And then he kind of put words to it and it became a song. Mary Shelley, when she wrote Frankenstein,
that's mad.
Dreamed the whole thing.
That whole
bizarre. The
creation of Frankenstein, that whole weekend.
Oh yeah.
Like betting on who could write
the scariest story.
The scariest story. God, there's a documentary in that. Like,
I'm surprised actually. You know, there's been so many adaptations. Actually, there's a new adaptation of Frankenstein out at the moment, in the cinema. That the creation of Frankenstein hasn't been made into a movie or something by itself.
It's so strange.
Yeah,
I like that. One of my favorite things about London is the blue plaques.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And there's one for John Pollard, who was on that. Who created the vampire. There's one of him.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I like that one.
Class.
Yeah, that is that's why I like, people give London a good slagging, but I do like it for that. Like,
I'm a sucker for, like, and I know it's a tourist trap thing, but you know, when you go to like a pub, like what's it called, the Old Mitre or Ye Old Cheshire Cheese, and you know, there's this whole backstory of like, oh, this dates back to like 1550 or something. I love that.
Oh man,
you know, walking into a poem and being like, you know, Charles Dickens drank here, or you know, that sense of history really is, it's rare, you know,
and like tangible.
Yeah.
I love that. I like being in those spaces where you know that those guys were.
Yeah. Same.
There's one. There's a place called the Museum of Comedy.
Oh yeah.
It's the same people who own the Leicester Square Theatre, and they have Spike Milligan's family donated a load of his stuff, and they have he used to write in a pub and he used to always sit in the same corner
Oh,
booth.
cool.
And they have the booth.
Nice.
So you can go to the Museum of Comedy and you can sit down, you can write at the chair and table. Spike Milligan
That's cool.
wrote all his stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like that stuff, I think it, it is airy-fairy, but it also is
There's
something to it to be like, I can touch this,
Yeah.
and they touch that. And
there is a kind of, sort of a madness involved in writing as a practice. Like when you were talking about Spike Milligan and sitting down at the same desk, there's a really famous American novelist called Barbara Kingsolver, who wrote a book a couple of years ago called Demon Copperhead, which was sort of a modern retelling of David Copperfield, but told through the opioid crisis in America. And there's an interview with her where she, she's asked, where did this idea come from? And she said, okay, I was visiting, or I was on a writing residency in Charles Dickens's old house, and his ghost appeared there and told her that, the opioid crisis was like an immediate thing that needed to be written about, and that you're the person to write about it. So she saw Charles Dickens's ghost and sat down at his desk and started writing the book. And then it went on to win like the Pulitzer and stuff like that. But it's just like, I think there is a point where you have to go, like, there's an element of writers just being a wee bit mad as well,
Yeah.
But I love that, I kind of love that craziness.
Well, it's such a bizarre, it's a bizarre thing to chase a creative outlet as your career, because we all know obviously the chances of success are very small, and even if it is a success, the chance of financial benefits are still very small. So it's at all points, you could be like, I'm just gonna train to be an accountant, but that's the your luck in your face of like, oh my god, I'd rather.
Well, no, because it feels so familiar, I'd like because I was good at English and history at school and gravitated towards those subjects. Careers advice being what it was, back in the whatever it was, the mid 2000s when I was leaving school, it was, oh well, like, if you're into science, you do medicine. If you're into reading stuff, you do law. So I ended up starting a law course and doing like 2 years of it down in Dublin. And getting that far in and just being like, I hate this so much. Like, why was I pushed towards this? It's so far away from what I'm actually interested in. But part of me is a wee bit like, man, I wish I'd stuck that out.
Yeah, but you don't really like. That's the thing, is like what you want is a nice wage every month.
Yeah.
But you want that. Or I want that, but I don't want to have to do any of that work because I would rather die.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the problem with that life, is I would be dead.
Yeah,
if I had to work in an office or do that. Thing. You just have to. Yeah, I suppose it's just
like the highlight of your week would be like doing meal prep on a Sunday evening. Making a big bowl of fucking spinach, putting it in the freezer, and then going in doing your. It's not even 9 to 5. It's probably like, 7 in the morning to 8 in the evening, getting home and eating this slop. Like, it would just be the worst life. Yeah. And you're like, oh, the money would be great, but like, when would you ever have the opportunity to enjoy it or spend it or,
Yeah, we did the right thing, right?
Listen, man,
Also, you're talking you reminded me when you were talking about the story of Dickens' ghost. Did you ever hear about the guy who wrote the Conan books?
No.
He said, I can't think of his name right now, but he said that Conan used to come and visit him every night and make him go, and he would stand behind him while he wrote the stories out on a typewriter, and only when he was finished, he had his sword, and he knew that if he stopped, Conan would kill him. So he had to get these stories out, and he only went away when he was finished.
Oh, that's mad.
Yeah, and that's how he wrote them.
I love that.
Yeah, same. I'm
hell.
like, yeah, because I also think with that stuff, I'm like, just because that's obviously insane doesn't make it less real for them. Like, it is a real, like, if that's what it took for him to get down and write, and he was like this barbarian telling his life story.
It is. It's like it is a very thin line. I think, you know, it is that old cliche of like a thin line between, you know, madness and genius in a way. You know, somebody as well revered as like Yeats, when you actually read about the stuff that he believed in and that he was into, it is mental. Like, he was part of this this magic circle in London called the Order of the Golden Dawn, which is like very 1920s and stuff. But their whole thing was like they would meet up and have these like enormous seances. You know, they would believe that they were channeling spirits and all. And like, if you read Yeats writing about his own writing, that he believed that a lot of it actually came through this spiritual kind of netherworld. Yeah. But then on the other hand, you know, the public image of him is like you know, almost like an Irish statesman. Really, you know, very sensible and very sober. But when you actually read about what he believed, like, it's crazy stuff. Really mad.
I suppose that kind of bringing all of that, the more you're into looking at stuff like that and into it, and it will just inform what you're putting out as well. And right, I always feel like a big sponge. That's what I think of like when I come to writing. I'm just like constantly taking stuff on, and then every now and again I can squeeze the sponge and it just comes out in whatever way.
Like, and it's the other thing as well of like, you know, you think that you're writing in a certain direction and then some outside influence comes in from nowhere, and you find that start to come out in combination with this other thing, and it makes this weird almost chemical reaction, you know, that goes into your writing. That's sort of how I like to think about writing anyway, is like, you know, it's like an unexpected chemical reaction of all of these different influences converging on each other and, you know, being formed into this singular point of view, you know.
That's amazing. What about like, do you feel like, do you have to write every day? Do you sit down and try and pump it out, or is it when the mood takes you?
I'm very much when the mood takes me. I always have been, and I've always been sort of semi-nocturnal as well, you know. I know that, like, I remember reading a number of years ago, Stephen King has this wonderful book called On Writing.
That's the best.
It's so good. It's so unpretentious and so generous, you know, as like, you know, strip away all the bullshit. This is what writing is about. But one thing that he talks about in his book is, you know, he has to sit down at his desk every day at a certain time with a pot of coffee on and blast through however many thousand words every day of his life. I've never been able to be that regimented in my own writing, and maybe it's because the art form is different. Maybe poetry kind of lends itself more to longer percolation and just sitting on things, and then it comes out when it comes out. Whereas I think that fiction writers, to a certain extent, have to get it down on paper and then refine it afterwards, you know. But for me, it's like a semi sort of sporadic thing, you know. Maybe I'll sit down at a desk a couple of times a week, but only when I have something on my mind that has to come out, and always at night. You know, I've never been able to be one of these people who gets up before 6 a.m. and sits down, and there are people that do that.
No, it's
these
great.
rare creatures, you know.
Yeah, like Jenna can write. She can write at any time, all day. We were sitting watching TV and she'll be knocking out a script. Or it's crazy. I need the world to be asleep. Yeah, like, I just don't need everyone. I need the world, the entire world.
It's the silence,
which is so unhealthy.
No, but it's lovely. And I think that's the flip side of that is why when you hear people who write in the morning, when they talk about it, the reason that they talk about it is the same reason as people who write at night. It's the silence, it's the quiet. It's before everyone else is awake. Whereas, you know, we're at the end of the day, everyone else has just gone to sleep. It's nice and kind of dark and cozy, and, you know, you can kind of be in your own head. And I tend to find as well, when you're on the way to winding down to sleep, you're at your most imaginative anyway. That's when your brain starts to sort of blast off all these mental images and stuff, and you're like, okay, well, you know, this surely is the time to write some of this mad shit that's going on in my head down.
Yeah.
Otherwise I'll lose it, you know, or forget about it, or, you know. So yeah, nighttime, and it kind of happens when it happens, you know. And it can happen sometimes in the way that you described about Jenna, you know, sitting, you know, you're sitting in front of the TV, you might have your laptop to one side and something will come into your head.
Yeah, God, it's interesting. Are you working on anything at the minute?
I have been for a while, you know. I've kind of struggled to think about where to go next. You know, because Bandit Country felt like such a personal thing, about home, the idea of home, and growing up, and Newry, and all of those kind of things converging together. It's taken me probably till now to kind of realize what I need to do, and so I've kind of realized that the theme that I keep gravitating back towards is the idea of home, and you know, the idea of sort of home not being a place, but, you know, a kind of thing that you make for yourself. And so what I'm trying to write at the moment is the idea of coming to terms with Newry no longer being my home, that sort of London is my home now, and kind of being present in that idea. And all of the kind of complicated feelings that come with that as well. You know, there is homesickness there, and there is a yearning to, you know, go back towards your centre of gravity, which for me is Newry, and always will be. That's where my family are, and, you know, that's kind of what I'm most familiar with. But yeah, it's kind of all the complicated feelings of being an Irish immigrant in England, and you know, there's a lineage there's heritage as well. You know, you know, every generation almost has a wave of people who leave Ireland, trying to find and make something better for themselves. Yeah. And so yeah, the kind of stuff I'm working on at the moment is very much based around all of those sort of big ideas about the history of being a part of that history of Irish emigration, and, you know, kind of feeling unmoored from yourself in a way.
Yeah, that's what I was chatting to Vittorio Angeloni recently, the comedian.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, and I definitely find myself a lot more thinking even about, like, what does Irishness even mean? To me here, you know, because I definitely don't feel the same. I mean, I think there's a definite north-south divide, and of course there's anyway. Yeah. But like, I feel more Irish here than I do when I'm in the south, which doesn't make
that's
any
interesting.
Sense.
You know, I think because I like Amy, my wife, is the same. You know, she's always said that she felt more Irish in Liverpool, where we lived before, than she would have in Dublin. I think I always thought that I would go back to Dublin at some point, because I spent the early years of my university life there, and I lived there for a couple of years. But I can see why, you know, with all the kind of partitionist ideas that you would come across, and being told by other Irish people that you're not really Irish.
It's just that it's funny. Robbie McShane, who's a great comedian, had a line, and I love it so much, is he says, they call us Nordies and we don't have a word for them.
Oh no, I do. I used to have a word for them.
Oh, what was the?
So this one came from my granda. Because I remember maybe I was having a conversation with him one weekend when I was back up from Dublin, and it was that exact thing of, you know, these bastards keep calling me Nordy, and it's really getting to me and really upsetting me. It's almost like diminishing my sense of Irishness when I've never felt anything else. I just am. And he was like, you know what we used to call people, because he was a welder, he was like, you know what we used to call people on a job who were like that? I was like, no. He was like, we used to call them blue shirts, you know, like going back to the old Civil War thing, where the fascist blue shirts were the militarized wing of Fine Gael. Yeah.
They've scrubbed that from there.
Oh, totally.
That's so funny.
But
Yeah.
very pro-partition.
Yeah.
Very anti-northern. Like it was almost baked into their ideology. And he was like, if you call someone down south a blue shirt, just watch their face drop. And I did it every time, and he was right. It was
That's
so
brilliant.
good. It was so good, and I've never looked back.
Lovely. Well, that's introduced into my lexicon. So we do that. But man, thanks very much.
No,
Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great.
Yeah.
And we'll get a pint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. All right. Bye. Bye.